Do you like movies and television? Would you like to learn more about the magic behind the movies and learn how they get from the minds of the creators to the screen? Do you consider yourself a bit of a film buff and would like to know more without going back to school? Then this is the show for you. Mincing Movie Magic is a broadcast designed to stimulate your intellect and explore the minds of screenwriters, producers, directors, and others behind the scenes who create the real magic we see on the screen. Each week, you can listen to screenwriter and producer Tom Blumquist and professional magician Scott Wells as they discuss film and the magic that goes into every production. From time to time, they welcome friends from the movie industry to give other points of view that brought their visions to life on screen. This is Mincing Movie Magic. Please welcome Hollywood writer, producer, and director Tom Blumquist, along with your host, Scott Wells.
And there we are. Hey, Six, how are you, man?
I'm fine, and that is an extremely dramatic opening. Thank you so much.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
I'm back at you.
Sláinte.
I want to tell you about this guy, Steve Sears, who is waiting in the wings. He's a writer, producer, author extraordinaire, graphic novelist. He's just a very interesting guy. A magician, by the way, at the Magic Castle. And we have worked together on a bunch of series, some detective shows, some action adventure, some sci-fi fantasy. And I've hired him as a freelance writer. He's hired me as a freelance writer. We've been on staff together. So there's a lot of different permutations to that. And his credits, I know we'll get into, but he's become a very important voice in sci-fi fantasy, especially in recent years. Xena Warrior Princess being one of many credits that are exciting. And so it's really cool to get to see him again, but also to have him share his feelings and thoughts about writing in different genres, because they're not all the same, and they all present, different challenges and opportunities. Right. And who better than Steve Sears to talk about some of that stuff? So let's bring him in.
And here he is now. Hey there, Steve. You there? It looks like that he has nothing better to do with his time than just do a little bathroom reading.
Just a little bit of pornography.
It's my novel, for those that don't know that, Devious Thinking, which Steve, by the way, as a friend and collaborator, read an early draft of that manuscript and gave me some very insightful notes, which were very helpful to me getting that book done, which is part of what writers all kind of do with each other. We read stuff, we talk, bounce ideas. You go to coffee, you have to get some fresh perspective, some fresh eyeballs or ears on whatever you're doing at various stages. And so on both my novels, Steve was very helpful, critically helpful in me getting oriented properly to what I needed to be doing, because you absolutely lose all objectivity when you're writing. After a point, you don't know what you're doing. If you think you're objective, you're a fool, because you're not, and you need someone to step in and go, "You're an idiot. Don't do this anymore." And what he said,
I'm more than willing to do that for you, Tom.
Thank you.
And I got a free book out of it, actually. And he
got a free book out of it.
He autographed it, and he autographed what he wrote was $3.95 at the discount counter.
There you go. And Scott Wells, you may recall, appeared in a couple of promos for the book.
That is true, yes.
Are on YouTube and Facebook. And one was a kind of just a short, funny riff on the most interesting man in the world beer commercials. And the other one was a coin magic related thing, which was really fun.
Really cool.
And he did a great job.
So between the two of us, Steve, it sounds like we've been trying to hurt his career with this book.
Oh, I've succeeded.
Yeah, both of you did a great job. So there you go.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you. Now, I know you guys had worked together a lot before, and before that, before you knew each other, I guess you kind of had worked on some projects, and then eventually did work together. So how did that actually begin? As far as, were you both writing on the same TV show or something, or were you the same writer's room, or how did this?
I'll do the first part, Steve. I got a job the dream job of dream jobs at the Stephen J. Cannell Company studio, the hottest independent studio in Los Angeles at the time. And I got a job as a staff writer, and then that became a story editor position, and then that became a producer position. And I was on a series called Riptide, and we were, in those days, eagerly looking for freelance writers. And Steve, take it from there.
Okay. And I will try to give you the short version of this. I was an actor. That's what I came out to Los Angeles to do. So that's really what I was kind of committed to. I had gotten into writing scripts just for the fun of it. Literally, I'm one of these people who always wants to understand what is the zen of somebody else's passion. You know, that moment where you kind of forget about the technical aspect and it happens. And so I was fascinated with that aspect of writing. So I was getting scripts and I was reading them. And one night I decided I would try to write a script. And it was a horrible, horrible script. However, you know, the experience was wonderful. All the characters were in my head. I loved doing it. So I thought, I'm going to keep doing this for the fun of it. Now, I was also, as I explained it, I had an entry-level position in the industry. I was working at a restaurant as a waiter. And while I was there, I met this guy, Bert Pearl. And Bert and I became best friends. And Bert also had an interest in writing and storytelling. So he and I started just writing scripts strictly for the fun of it. That was the only reason we were doing it. And I think we would get a script, we would break it down, we try to figure out how things worked and just write it. So in the process of doing this, one of the things that I used to do is I would call over to the production offices and I would ask if they had a writer's guide. Some of them had Bibles, some had guides. Most of them actually at that time didn't. But the ones that did, they were, you know, willing to send it to me. That was fine. So Riptide had just come on the air. And I saw the 2-hour pilot. I thought it was great. I started watching the show, and Bert and I started talking about, hey, this is kind of an interesting, let's write one of these. And so I called over to the offices of Stephen J. Cannell. And they put me through to this woman, and I didn't get her name. And I asked her, I said, do you have a writer's guide? And she said, well, no. She goes, but have you seen the show? And I said, oh, yeah, I love it. And then we started just talking. And most of the conversation was not even about the industry. You know, where are you from? I'm from Florida. Oh, I have relatives in Florida. We just talked. Then at the end of that, she said, she goes, have you written any scripts? And I said, oh, my friend and I, we've written a couple. And she said, well, I know the producers are looking for writers. So if you know an agent, send them in. You never know. I went, great. And that was it. Conversation was over. I didn't get her name. She didn't get my name. So I called this guy that Bert and I knew, who was an agent, and I told him that, and he said, sure, I'll send a couple over. So he sent them over. 1 month later, I get a phone call from this dude, from Tom Blumquist, who says, why don't you guys come in? We want to meet you. So Bert and I are like, okay, all right, I guess this will be fun. We don't know. We never had a professional meeting. So we went over and met him and the exec producer of the show, Babs Grayhowski, and we sat in their office and we just had a great time. I mean, we were just kicking back. It was fun. And so at a certain point, Tom asked if we had any ideas for Riptide. And since we were thinking of writing a script, we had ideas. So anyway, we pitched like 5 ideas. 2 of them they threw out. 3 of them they thought were interesting. And they said, come back next week and see if you can develop those. So Bert and I worked on 2 of the ideas. The 3rd one we couldn't break, but we came up with a new idea. Went back in. Pitched those again. And they said, that 3rd idea, we kind of like that. Why don't you write out a story? So we went off and wrote up a story. Now, seriously, we did not know what was going on. We thought they were in hiatus. And we just thought, hey, they're just so damn charming. This is cool. They want to hang out with us. So we went back in with that one story we had written out. And then we watched what I look back on. And I say, this was the first of many times where I saw true masters at their craft working. Because Tom and Babs took that story and they ripped it apart. And then they put it together. And then they rearranged it. And they and never once lost the core. And Bert and I just sat there fascinated. We loved watching this.
At the process.
At the whole process of this passion. And what I call the creative bouncy room, where things were just going like that. And we were joining in. So I remember at the end of this meeting, if you remember this, Tom, we're about to leave, and Tom comes over to me and he says, I need the name of your agent for business affairs. And I looked at Tom and I said, "What? Did we get an assignment?" And Tom's reaction, he kind of looked at us. He goes, "You got the assignment 2 weeks ago."
When we sent you off to do the story, that's an assignment.
Yeah, we didn't know that. So literally, we turned in that first draft. Now, by the way, I'll give a quick side note. When Bert and I left the office, Bert turns to me and he says, "Are we going to get paid for this?" And because we didn't know. And I said, I guess. And he goes, "Well, how much?" And at that time, the day rate for an actor was like $250 a day. And I was an actor. So I said, "Well, I hope it's like $500 because we have to split it." So it was $15,000 for one script back then. Wow. When we got the story payment, we were convinced that we had sold our souls to the company. So we turned in that draft on a Friday. And Monday, this was back in the mid-'80s, and I had an answering machine that you literally had to call up with a little thing and go boop, so it would play it back. I had a cassette tape in it.
Cassette tapes, yeah.
Yep. And so I was not there, and I came back, and I checked my messages, and there was a message from Tom. And Tom said, "Read your script, loved it. I know that the A-Team and Hardcastle and McCormick are looking for writers, so we're going to send your names over there, and who knows, maybe you'll get another assignment." And so I was like, what the heck just happened? So Wednesday morning, I got a call from Babs Grayhowski.
My boss.
Yes. And I was asleep at the time. So literally it was, the girl I was dating we were sleeping on the floor because I took the money and put it in savings. I couldn't even afford a bed. I was still living in that little studio. And so I answered the phone and she was like, "Steve, this is Babs." And I'm like, "Oh, hi Babs, how are you?" And she said, "Well," she goes, "we all read your script here. Steve Cannon read it last night. You only had one note in the entire script. And so Tom and I were talking and we thought maybe you guys would like to come down and get an office and work with us full time." And my reaction though is I went, "Oh," and she goes, "You're asleep, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she goes, "When you realize what I just said, call me back." And she hung up. And I swear it took, I turned to my girlfriend immediately. I was wide awake. And I said, "Was I just on the phone?" And she didn't know, she was asleep.
So surreal.
Here's the funny thing. For the next 2 hours, I tried to do my best writing ever because I wanted to concoct a way that I could call and find out if that was true without looking like an absolute idiot if it wasn't. So when I called, they patched me through to Tom, and Tom solved the problem. The first thing Tom said to me, he said, "So you guys are going to come in? You're going to work with us?" And that actually started Bert and my career. That was it.
Bert and Ernie.
Bert and Ernie.
And by the way, let me inject here. Mm-hmm. The scripts that they showed us, those speculative scripts, the samples, were phenomenal. One of them in particular, I think was it a Simon and Simon?
We did it was a Simon and Simon and a Magnum.
Yeah, I think the Simon and Simon, one of them, they're both good. One of them, maybe the Simon and Simon blew me away. And the banter between the characters was not unlike what we were trying to do. And while I was looking through a pile of scripts for somebody to come in, Babs was looking through a pile of scripts. She found a guy named Paul Birnbaum, who's a wonderful writer as well. And they all started pretty much at the same time as staff writers. Yeah. Little did they know how much that meant financially, how it all worked. And
you were just there for the fun of it, I guess, and realized, hey, whatever happens, happens. I'm just here for the free donuts.
They thought this was like just fun and games. It's like, no, you guys are going to be making like whatever, $1,500 or $2,000 a week, and you're going to be doing this, and you have a huge office and a secretary, and their minds were just, and it was so great because we did not. I mean, we knew they were new writers, but we didn't know they were that new. But they were really good writers. And Bert Pearl, who's passed away years ago, wonderful guy. The two of them together were utterly insane, which was perfect for us for that time.
True.
And they wrote some wonderful scripts. The Curse of the Mary Aberdeen was the one that we bought, that first script, which was a classic kind of Riptide episode. Really interesting, very different. than what we were thinking of doing and how we would do things. I mean, it was great. So, and that did start them, and it was really fun.
Yeah.
I regretted it every day since.
Of course.
Every day.
I remember when we got in there, there's a lot of different stories about it. Bert and myself, just literally the day we were supposed to show up. I mean, when I called Tom back and he said, "You're coming in," Tom said, now I'd left the restaurant. Bert and I both were putting ads in the front of shopping carts at that time. Literally, I was making $130 a month. I'd saved up some money from the restaurant thing, but $130 a month. And so I told Tom, "Yeah, we'll do this." And Tom says, "No, I know you got another job. So, we're not in a rush here. Give them a 2 weeks notice before you come in." And I said, I remember saying, I said, "Tom, I'm putting ads in the front of shopping carts. You really think I'm worried about burning that bridge?"
You might need that someday yet, Steve.
That's right.
I still like you.
I can still snap them in and out, I got to tell you. But
So
that's
Scott,
what started it. Yeah.
It did start that, and I was trying to actually today, Steve, think of all the shows we worked on together, and I'm not sure I could even remember them all. But it was Riptide, Hardcastle and McCormick. We were not on staff together, but we were all freelance episodes for them. Stingray, we were on staff together. A-Team, we were on staff together.
Mm-hmm.
Swamp Thing.
Yep. I wrote a couple of Jesse Hawks, or I wrote at least one Jesse Hawks.
Yeah, there were a couple of shows that I was a producer, and they wrote a Jesse Hawks, and then I wrote a Highwayman episode, and you were story editors, but I'm not sure that was necessarily at the same time. Walker, Texas Ranger, he did one of those. I went in and did a Xena episode, show he created and co-created, and what else? Are there others somewhere in there?
Well, the Xena came in after Xena. Is that right?
Yeah, I tell people I went from Xena to Sheena, and then I was developing Bolima, another character.
What about Hercules? Did you do Hercules also?
Well, that's a strange way of phrasing it, but I did not work on the show. No.
Okay.
But he knew him very well.
Slancha.
No, I did not work on Hercules. I was strictly a Xena guy.
Okay. I understand. I know there are different genres, of course, and I think it would be difficult when two different things. One is, Steve and Tom, really for both of you guys to answer either together or separately, and that is of having a vision for a new show, to have this presented and pitched before it gets the green light, and a lot of times it doesn't, and you just have to go and have another one and continue to write these out. Or, and you have to do a lot of research before that, or is it more difficult to be a screenwriter and write for a show that is already successful? Now you got to jump in and you got to keep that same flow, understanding what the vision was and is of the producer and the director and the actors and the previous screenwriters. Which is more difficult, or are they just different?
Wow.
That's a really good question. Creating your own show, obviously, since that's coming from inside and it's more organic, it's a lot more work, but it's also a lot easier because it is all flowing from you. You are creating the voices, they're being developed. But I'll be interested to hear what Tom says about the other part of the question, which is how you approach writing episodes for established shows. Now, for me, one of the things I was really, since I was a child, one of the things I always did is whenever I watched a TV show that I liked, I emulated the characters myself. Whenever I read novels, I would sometimes read the novel outside so I could be the character. And as a result of that, or because of that, when I would research a TV show, I was actually fairly good at catching the voices and the rhythms very quickly in my head. And maybe that was because of the acting background that I had as well. So I can say that there were two things with me. One was a completely undefinable Zen thing, which is what I just said. I could catch the voices. I could feel the rhythm. I sometimes translate a lot of my writing into what I consider to be more like music. There's a flow. There's a rhythm. Things happen because the audience leans into it or they lean back from it. And I was really good at kind of picking up that flow as far as the as shows were concerned. And then the technical side was I always looked at what the show was directed to do. In other words, how did they sell themselves? How did they market themselves? And I would literally write down a checklist of what they want in a script so they can sell it. Not sell the scripts literally, but market the show. So if it's an action show, you've got, this, you've got that, you've got this. If it was a one character, that character is always at the top. If it was an ensemble, make sure they all get shared. But that was my approach for doing spec scripts, or when I was brought on to do an individual episode. But I'd be real curious to hear what Tom's approach on that was.
Well, my take on it is that all writers are not created equal. And there are some really, really, really great television writers who really can't or are unable to successfully create their own world, their own concept, do either a feature film or a pilot for a show. But they're really, really, really good writers. They're mimics. They can emulate what it has come before on that series. And so Steve can do both. I've written a bunch of pilots, but none of them made it on the air as a series. He did. So it's not just voices of characters, but it's a world that those stories are going to live in. And some people have the ability to successfully and almost effortlessly create a world that is not only interesting, but commercially viable and meets somebody else's needs, a network or a studio. And then the mimicry part, which is what episodic television ultimately is you come in and somebody else created a pilot and you listen to it, you hear those voices and the rhythms and the flow, and you tap into the essential aspects of the world and whatever its rules or conventions might be. So if it's a detective show, that detective works in a certain way. It's Columbo, he has a certain MO, the way he does things, and you hear that, you metabolize it, and you're able to replicate it. Creating Columbo from scratch, good luck, because that's really a different challenge. And Steve did it really well on Xena, which he can talk about. That was an adaptation of sorts, taking something and turning it into a TV series, and then was fresh imprimatur creatively on it. And so when I went in to write one of those, I saw what he was doing. We talked about what he had in mind. He had something in mind for me to do, and I was able to get in the flow of what he needed and wanted with some measure of success for him. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And that brings me to another question then about whether, as far as genres go, whether you'd be able then easily to shift from one to another. In other words, you're doing a detective and then you got to shift to a fantasy show you're doing in the afternoon, and then a sitcom for that night or whatever.
If only we could all be that busy. But Steve, I'll let you speak to that, because you've written certainly as many genres as I have, but it's not. I mean, easy. You asked
if you get into one, I would,
because you have to hear the world. You have to completely. You're not pretending these stories. You live in the story. You are the characters, and so either you hear them or you don't. Either you get it or you don't. So if you're doing a spaceship hardware sci-fi show going interplanetary, either you kind of get that in your soul or you don't. And Steve has written a bunch of these different kinds of sci-fi things, and he has an imagination that allows him to wrap his brain around whatever that world is really successfully. The rest of us, we mere mortals, have to struggle to tap into that.
Well, thank you on that.
You were just finishing an assignment today. Did you hand it in?
I was about to ask you about that. You've been working on something new, I understand, for Disney. Is that something you can talk about?
Well, it's actually for, well, let me rephrase that. It is a short story for an anthology that is coming out, I believe, it's Fox Publishing that's actually doing it, but they have an association with Disney on this because I think I can talk about this because I just submitted the story and it needs the final approval. But it is the next anthology in the Alien versus Predator universe.
Oh, wow.
And that is a universe that has a very heavy canon, very strict rules, because they mash two universes together. And I spent...
And I could not do it. I could not tap into that. I just don't get it.
Trying to keep the reality of those And a lot of it, of these doing these fantasy or these science fictions, is a matter of basically having your readership or your audience believe a reality that has been manufactured. As
Right.
you know, it's the old phrase, bullshit has its own logic, which I first heard from Frank Lupo, who, you know, rest his soul. If you convince the audience that the bullshit is the logic, you've got them.
Yeah.
So there are rules within these universes and rules within fantasies. And as long as, my phrase is, you don't have to explain everything, but your characters have to justify everything.
Which was a lot what Star Trek was about. It seemed like in Star
Absolutely.
Trek, it was more about the story than it was the special effects and the monsters and the planets and the travel and whatnot. But it was the interactions among the characters.
Yeah.
Gene Roddenberry had a real specific vision of mankind's future, humankind's future, I guess, to be politically correct.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, no one's more politically correct than me, both of you. Anyway,
Yeah.
but he had a very specific vision
Mm-hmm.
of what the future would hold for humankind. And from the Bill Shatner show all the way through every remake,
Iteration,
sequel, that tracked, and they were rigid about adhering to his philosophy. And you've got a Bible of stuff of all the things he thought, and you were expected to ingest that and understand it. And there were a lot of rules.
And to be true to that fan base also, which goes back again to the Alien versus Predator type of thing you're working on, Steve. There's a fan base that they're going to be watching that closely.
Absolutely.
Saying, "Oh, wait a minute, you know, that didn't happen in Aliens or whatever."
And I've worked on shows that had very heavy fan bases. Obviously, the A-Team still has a fan base, and Xena has a huge and absolutely awesome and wonderful fan base.
I heard that they've even got Xena, not just Comic Con, but there's a separate XenaCon or something.
There was XenaCons were running for about 25.
Wait a minute. I just made that up. They seriously have this called
Yes,
XenaCon?
they did. No, every year there was a Xena convention.
Okay.
And the last one was 5 years ago, and we were supposed to have a reunion convention this year, but it's been delayed until next year.
Sure.
But this was a regular event, and there's also a thing called a Xenite retreat. Shout out to Penny out there, run by Xena fans, and it's where they all get together at a camping facility up in the forest. It's like a full facility with little bungalows and everything, and they teach Amazonian archery and they watch the shows, and I get invited as a guest to talk to them, and they're fans are. I was a fan when I was a kid. Star Trek Classic, that was my big thing.
Sure.
So, but again, going back to that thing about creating the universe, you're right. You have to please the fans. And as a side story, especially dealing with the Xena thing, I was actually invited to speak at one of the regional Mensa gatherings that they had. I've spoken at a few of them, and that's another group of people that I just am enamored with. And I was I started off one of my discussions because I was going to talk about television, and it was called The Subtle and Silent Art of Manipulation, or How to Lie for Fun and Profit. And I wanted to talk about how we created these worlds. And I started off by saying, but first I want to talk about centaurs. And I brought up some pictures of these centaurs, beefy dudes that half man, half horse. And then I went through, I even found one of a hipster, as a horse. And then I said, but here's a question. How come we never see lady centaurs? So I said, well, there's actually a reason for this. And then on the screen behind me, I brought up a Punnett cube, which is basically it's a genetic cube, and it shows the distribution of certain genetics. And I talked about sexually related alleles and dominance and recessive genetics. And I showed them how, using this cube, how there was a recessive gene and a positive and a dominant gene, and on the X chromosome, you had them on opposite ends of the bottom X, but because it's a Y chromosome, it only existed on one.
Holy
so
cow.
If it existed on that one, now I went on and on with this.
Yeah. And everybody's going, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, okay.
And when I finished it, I said, because what you ended up with is a 1 in 4 chance of a normal birth, a 1 in 4 chance of a stillbirth, a 1 in 4 chance of a female carrier of the gene, and a 1 in 4 chance of a centaur. And I said, that's why you don't see lady centaurs. And then my last card that I flashed up, and I said, and they don't exist. And everybody laughed, and I said, now what I just did is I sold you an entire dump truck of crap, but I used science to sell it to you, and you bought it. Mm-hmm. Now, the way that actually happened was at a Xena convention. I had finished a talk, and I was taking questions, and somebody asked me that. Why don't we see any female centaurs on the show? And I made this up on the spot. I studied some genetics, you know, and I just made the whole thing up on the spot. And when I was done with it and everybody was leaving the auditorium, this guy walks up to me and he goes, he's got this confused look on his face. And he goes, I'm a geneticist, and that makes sense.
By the way, Scott, now you know, and all your viewers, what it's like in a story meeting with Steven L. Sears.
Well, with all of us.
It's all of this kind of crap constantly. And out of that, when you're trying to figure out a story, you know, Steve will be spewing this stuff for hours. But out of that comes genius.
Something,
you know,
great. Yeah.
Not that particular crap, but
well, it's the ability to do that.
Yeah, it's got to make sense to me. That's the thing.
But going back to the fans, so there's a big fan fiction universe out there, and many of these iconic shows that we've had the privilege of working on have fans that are so ardent, so plugged in, that even if they're not writers, they write storylines and screenplays and whatever, books about these characters and these stories. And so we do have an obligation to them. I used to go every year to something called Christie Fest, which was an annual gathering of fans of Catherine Marshall's Christie novel and a series that I worked on. And, you know, people from all over the country would fly into the Smoky Mountains near where we shot the show, and cast members would be there, and some of the writers would be there, and local people that were in the show. And it was so fun for a week just getting together, and they would do skits and play all the characters, and it was so fun. But out of that, every year I would go back. It's long after the show was gone off the air, off of CBS and then off of the PAX network, that these people are still connected to these characters and the world of these characters in a very deep and very meaningful way. Mm-hmm. And they would be writing all these stories, and it's exhilarating, frankly. And some of them not professional writers, most of them not professional writers, but boy, the passion comes through. And I know Steve has had many instances of that with Xena especially, but these other shows, A-Team, people are, remember Riptide? They had a fanzine. And
they had a fanzine for Riptide called
an actual magazine.
Yep, The Pilot's Prayer.
Yeah. What was it called?
It was called The Pilot's Prayer, based on the character of Nick, who had the helicopter. And it was established that he did a pilot's prayer, or it was either him or it was Cody or Boz that did the pilot's prayer, because the screaming Mimi, the helicopter, looked like it was going to fall out of the sky at any moment.
Smoke spewing out of it, and it looked like it was. But the point is, the when you do these shows as a writer, whether it's original work of yours or you're on somebody else's show, contributing to what they're doing, you always have it very close in your mind that these people watch these things, care about what you're doing, and your obligation is to serve their interest, to make it enjoyable for them. And if it's an existing show, you become acutely aware these people know as much about these characters, maybe more than some of the writers on the show do, and some of the actors, and they really have expectations, and you have to discern all of that and serve it up to them in ways that they will enjoy, because they'll be the first ones to tell you, you got this wrong, this was wrong, I can't believe you was wearing that. Nobody'd ever do that. I mean, they know the show. I'm sure Xena was completely like that.
Oh yeah, and I'm proud to say that a lot of the fanfic writers, we have so many that did Xena, and many of them have gone on to professional writing careers.
That's neat.
Really done well in not just in novels but also in screenwriting.
How do you go about actually accepting?
Sorry, go ahead.
How do you go about accepting a new script? In other words, I would think actors and producers and particular directors will get handed scripts from fans all the time, and they don't want to look at it because they don't have an agent, I guess. I mean, do you first of all have an agent, or they just send it in? And how do you go about actually saying, yeah, I'll read this, or I know this guy, or what?
Take that one, Steve.
I was going to say,
we've all faced it.
I don't have it right here, but there's a wonderful book called the Non-User-Friendly Guide to Aspiring TV Writers that was written by somebody that covers a lot of this stuff.
What does that look like?
Oh my gosh! Well, looky there.
That's a wonderful book, everybody. If you're interested in this stuff, buy this book.
Yes, and it doesn't teach you how to write, but it does talk about things like this in the business. But yeah, I mean, everybody who works in the business, both Tom and myself have taught classes on just this subject, and
about submitting scripts. You mean
about both sides of it, submitting scripts, but being the people that they are trying to submit them to.
Yeah.
There's a lot about this industry that just makes no sense. It's very illogic. There was no committee that sat down and said, this is how we're going to do it. It's still kind of finding itself. So there's no one main path. It's like people say, well, how do you become successful? And I say, when you do it, let me know how you did it. Because it'll be completely different. Obviously, completely different from how I got into the business. So I've had a lot of people who have asked me to, everything from, I have a great idea, Steve, if you would write it, I'll give you 50% of it. To people who have, said, I have a script, I want you to read it and produce it. And I tell them, look, I'm not that kind of a producer. I don't have like a Stephen J. Cannell production company. That's not the way I work. But as far as them submitting things in general, all you can talk about is in general. The classic thing is, yes, you get an agent or a manager, and the manager hooks you up with a producer. The producer reads it and either hires you to write something or wants to develop it, and so on and so on and so on. Using that story I told you about how Bert and I broke in, from the moment I wrote that first horrible script that I'd ever written in my life until the moment I was in the office at Stephen J. Cannell was less than a year. That's unheard of. That's completely unheard of. I'd never written anything. But what happened for Bert and I is that every textbook step that we're told is supposed to work is exactly what happened, except we never had a setback. We wrote the scripts, we made the phone call, we got the meeting, we got the assignment, and we were on staff. That happened in a row. That is, I've never heard of anybody actually doing that. That's how exceptional it was. But that is generally what you were told. The bottom line is
by the way, it took me 10 years to get to that point at Cannell. You did it in a year. It took me 10 years of whatever I was doing, writing.
You really have to sleep with better people, I got to tell you.
Well, I clearly there's something wrong. But my story was more typical. And by the way, how grateful am I and was I? Because there's people, better writers than me, that slog at this, for 20, 30 years and never connect. So as Steve said, it's different for everybody. One thing I will add to this, when you're at a studio, there are legal things. The reason we said, the woman on the phone said to Steve, do you have an agent? Have them submit the material. Is that you're not allowed to read material from somebody that hands it to you because you might get sued. Stephen J. Cannell was sued by somebody who said that he stole the A-Team idea from him. Mm-hmm. It sued him. Now, the guy lived in some city far away, Detroit or Cleveland or someplace, never been to Los Angeles, never written anything. And they said, well, how did Steve Cannell get this idea? Well, he broke into my apartment and stole it.
Oh, gee.
Now, that was Greatest American Hero, though, because he also got sued for the A-Team as well.
Yeah, well, I think all those shows.
One of them. Doesn't matter.
But the point is, of course it's ridiculous, but all the more reason you can't. We would get envelopes all the time, and you would just write on there, please return unopened, or somebody would accidentally open it and see what it is, returned unread, and then it would be documented by the attorneys at the company because people are litigious. And what happens is somebody says, I got an idea. It's about a guy who robs a bank. Yeah. And well, I'm sorry, I can't hear it. And then 2 years later, you do an episode about a guy that robs a bank, and they think
my idea.
Well, their idea.
Yeah.
And no, you didn't.
Yeah.
There's a million stories about guys that rob a bank. That's not even a story. That's a premise for something that might become a story. And so, in answer to your question, some of the fans are really well-intentioned, and as Steve said, some of them really accomplished, but you're not allowed to absorb the material, anything about the material. If they come in, it's an official meeting, like
yes, you had with him, right?
And it was a real meeting. They didn't even know it was a real meeting. They pitched. We could have sent them away, without payment, but the script was so good. We wanted something to work, and they had really good ideas. Like, well, we like that. Go work on that. That was a story assignment, but they were invited in. Mm-hmm. And they had been submitted by an authorized, it can either be an agent or an attorney, frankly.
That makes sense. But, okay. There was someone who had asked a question here. Matt Alexander had said, because that more television series now have arcs as opposed to standalone episodes like it used to be, is it harder to get a script accepted on Spec now than in the 1990s?
Well, let me clarify one thing about that, because there's an underlying premise that's incorrect. The underlying premise is that you would write a script for, pick a show that's on with all these incredible arcs, and that you would submit it, and you're hoping that they will buy your script and they will produce it. Spec scripts are not bought. They're not bought. Spec scripts are just to show your ability and your talent. There's an old adage that you never send your spec script to the show you wrote it for. The reason for that is because if you are sending it to their production staff, the production staff lives that show 24 hours a day. It's in their head. There is no way you, as a freelancer from the outside, just writing a spec script, is going to be able to hit that bar, because that bar is a lot higher. I judge scripts on the shows I'm working on with much, much more strictly than I would somebody just sending me a script. So it's like when I was working on Xena, I was getting, either a Spec Xena or a Hercules or any of the action adventure shows that were going on in syndication. And what I really wanted to read was like a Dawson's Creek, because it's character. And character is what we were always looking for.
Yep.
So the underlying thing about writing the spec script so that can be produced, no. But you are writing a spec script so that you can have your talent noticed. And because of that, you don't have to be as strict with what the canon is on the show. You just don't want to be so out of date with the show that it ages your script, and they realize.
I was going to add to what you just said. So let's say you're writing. Let's say you want to submit to Grey's Anatomy, and they have a general arc. They have a story of the week, but they have an arc that's ongoing. As a viewer, you only know what you've seen on the air. You don't know what they have in the pipeline for the next 6 or 8 episodes. They maybe have planned out for the whole next 2 years. You don't know that they're going to kill somebody off and they're going to add a new character and the hospital's going to burn to the ground. You can't possibly know that. So when you send the script to them, it's already obsolete in their minds, and it's going to diminish what they think of your work. Now, if you send them a Law and Order, they probably don't know Law and Order any better than you do. They watch it, they enjoy it. So we used to, Steve sent us a Magnum and a Simon & Simon. We liked those shows. They were great shows, but we didn't know those. Well, Babs had been a writer on Magnum, but I didn't know those shows any better than Steve and Bert did. So I could enjoy them as a viewer, and for my sensibilities, see how good they were, how effective. If they'd written one of our shows, we know what the network hates. We know there's 2 actors that don't want to work together. We know that there's 6 stories that we've rejected, that we know that what all the production problems are. We know you'll never do a show on the planet Neptune. Well, you know what? Maybe the writer thinks a Neptune episode would be great. Well, it gets dismissed immediately. Well, that's not our show. Yeah. So Steve is absolutely right. And to the person that posed the question is that if you want to write a Shameless, let's say, don't write Shameless. Write something else that's got the kind of edge and humor and dark social sensibilities that show has. Don't send them a Shameless. It'll never pass their muster. They know Shameless better than anybody could ever know it. So send them something else. And maybe like Steve and Bert did, they got our attention because their work was so fresh and effective. And then they came in, and in the room, they're such good guys, and we had so many. He wasn't kidding. Yeah. We laughed. We talked for, a couple of hours. It was great. We loved hanging out with these guys. And we're talking episodes and stories and stuff, and the fact that they were putting literally those ads in the front of shopping carts, those little cards. How much did you get paid per
$130 a month. There you go.
$130 a month to shove those things that you see that says buy it, eat at the pizza place.
Yeah,
we had a great time talking about all of that with them and hearing their ideas. And these guys are great. We can make this work. They're fantastic. And sure enough, it did. So, and by the way, I also add, when Steve and I started at all of this, there was a healthy, robust universe of freelance writers who were able to, shows. We eagerly tried to give at least half the assignments on the show to freelance writers. Right. Almost every show I've ever produced, because I like the fresh voices. I like the fresh ideas, even if I have to do a little polish on the script at the, right before shooting, because the little nuances, who cares? You get great, fresh input. Mm-hmm. And now, because so many, those were self-contained shows, very few were continuing storylines. So now, because so many shows are an ongoing overall season arc, it's almost impossible to hire a freelancer to jump into that, and they're not living it every day. As Steve said, 24/7. You come in, and where do you want me? How do I figure? What's this character gonna? Wait, what did he do 3 weeks ago? What do you have in mind? You can't do it. So all the assignments go to the staff writers, and those writers are usually hired because they were successful on some other show previously. And it's hard, even though there's a million shows, it's hard to get on those shows to break in. So it's a dichotomy, and so if you're the viewer aspires to be on one of these shows, you have to write good samples, and you got to somehow get those samples to people who matter, agents, producers, studio executives. There are people looking for new writers out there, but to be able to audition a script for them on an assignment and get paid for it, like Steve and Bert did, those days are really gone. And
let me add one more thing, Tom, if you remember this. During the time that I called and asked for that writer's guide, and then talked to that agent who said, "Oh yeah, I'll send a couple of scripts over." Between that time and the time we had the meeting, Bert and I went ahead and wrote a Spec Riptide. I don't know if you remember this, Tom. Okay, because this is true story. This is what happened when we got into the office. Because this is very important. Because once you get on a show, you have to recognize the fact that you don't know this show as well as the people around you. You have to listen. You have to learn. As Tom said to us, literally, he walked into our office and he said, "You guys, welcome to grad school, except we're going to pay you." So we started learning. But after we finished with our first script, Mary Aberdeen, Tom, you said to us, "Well, now we have to figure out what your next assignment's going to be." And I said, Bert and I actually wrote a Spec Riptide. And you said, "Oh, yeah, I'll take a look at it." And we gave it to you. I don't know if you remember this or not. Well, the next day, you came back into the office and you put it on Bert's desk, because we had an office together. And he said, "It's a good thing you didn't send this to us."
Oh. You wouldn't have had the second meeting.
We would not have. We wouldn't have gotten the first meeting.
I had forgotten that, but I'm not surprised. It was a complete miss, because you weren't
completely a miss. We had slapstick comedy in it, which was not. We had a lot of comedy in Riptide, but it was grounded. We had the danger misplaced. This was stuff I learned as we were going along. I look back on this and I realize that's where we screwed up. We did this, we did that. Now, maybe that script would have done well somewhere else. I am almost certain that if the Simon and Simon had gone to their offices, or the Magnum had gone to their offices, we wouldn't have gotten those meetings.
But Remington Steele might have loved your Riptide,
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, yeah. That is how it works. That's a good point. I had forgotten about that script, and thank God I have. So no, but it is so clear, and it's very hard for people on the outside, what I call civilians, but people who aspire to this, to understand the business dynamics and the realities. As Steve said, a lot of this is illogical and it makes no sense, but it doesn't make it not real. It's very real. And there are certain things that are, look, if you were going to build an office building, let's say we got, $100 million, we're going to build an office building. Do you want to have somebody just submitting ideas for your building, or do you want to hire an architect and go through it in an informed, nurturing, careful way. You want to check their work before. Of course, you're going to want to do it that way. You don't just, build it because some guy says, well, I know how to build a building. And no, you have to go through certain stages, protocols to get it right, because there's a lot of money at stake. There's a lot. People at the network are nervous that the show's not going to work. They're fighting. The show Riptide that Steve and Bert came in on, we had 6 hot new shows tried against us on ABC in that 1 year. We were on NBC. Who's the Boss and all kinds of shows. They tried all these shows against us, and they all kept getting moved or canceled. And the network people are like, they live this, and you're looking at the ratings every morning, the day after your show, the overnights we call them, and so there are real pressures on people way up the food chain, and then it comes down to the writers and the producers on a show and the actors, and there's rumors, and oh my God, they're going to cancel us, and we're going to get moved off, we're going to move us to Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Whatever it is, and so you're trying to be creative and liberated and free in that world and try to be impervious to the pain, but you have to get it right. And so some script coming in the mail, nah, it's just not good. You can't.
I wanted to pull this in again, just when we were talking about genres earlier. Are there some genres that are more difficult to write than others, or something that you have a favorite or a horror story about? Or
well, that's interesting. Steve, you got a horror story? Either how about a favorite genre challenge, or the worst genre challenge that caused you the most pain? Is there anything?
That's why you script writer would ask the question rather than me. That's good.
Yeah, but
that's an interesting question. Most of my horror stories involve Tom.
Of course, goes without saying.
Something. I have loved every script that I've worked on. Not that they've all been perfect or wonderful to everybody, but I loved the process. So I look at it as a challenge. Some of them are more difficult than others, and sometimes it takes you a while to find it, that it thing that gives you the passion. Well, okay, a show that Tom was producing, and he brought me in to write an episode, Jesse Hawks, with Bob Conrad. And the episode I was writing, I'm not going to bother pitching it, but it was on a military base, and Bob Conrad's character and his sons were pretending to be in the military so they could find a murderer, and so on and so on and so on. And we knew what the story was. We'd agreed on the story. I wrote out my story thing. Tom had approved it, and I went into writing the script. And that one, for some reason, even though I'm a military brat, so I have a military background, and the characters were very well done. I mean, the characters have been established on a previous series already, one of Bob's other shows, and something just wasn't working. And then there was a character who was more of a side character. He was like the lieutenant of this particular group. And God, you're gonna have to help me on this, Tom, because I can't remember the actor's name. He was a friend of yours, and you showed me a quick clip of him, and because you were considering him for that role. And as soon as I saw the clip of this actor, it just popped into my head.
Was it David Aykroyd?
No, it wasn't David. No, David's another wonderful actor.
Yeah.
God, I have to think of his name. But it clicked into my head. Suddenly I had a rhythm in my head, and that character actually became more substantial. And everything started to fall together. And from that point on, it was like, I'm loving this. I'm going right in there. It just sometimes takes a while to find that.
To kind of click into the groove, basically.
Well, and whatever it is you can tap into, it's not always the same thing. Steve is bringing up a really good point. It may be that you love motorcycles, and so you're going to be totally involved in, that's your cue, and somehow you get into it creatively. It may be whatever. For me, the worst, most painful experience was a show called Sequest, DMV, which was DSV, which was a Steven Spielberg series, and this was
Deep Space Nine or something.
No, it was a submarine show.
Submarine
exploration show. Futuristic. Roy Scheider was the star. And they had not even shot the pilot yet. And a couple of the producers or guys I had worked with, and they called me in, and they were still trying to figure out what the show was. They had a pilot script that was very good. And Tommy Thompson wrote that script, I believe. And they had a really good pilot, and it had been sold, and they got all this money, and they built this massive series of submarine sets and stuff at Universal. I went over there. They said, we want you to write one of these first few episodes. And I walked through the sets and met all these guys, and the producers were real professionals. And David Kemper was one of the producers, Steve, you know him, and great people. And what I didn't realize at the time is that there were some creative disconnects between what we called the Tower, the executives at Universal, and Steven Spielberg's group, and the producers of the show, and Roy Scheider. Everybody had different expectations of what the show was going to be. And the pilot was great, but it didn't necessarily show you what the whole series was going to be like. And I just realized my battery's going low. Hang on a minute. I got to plug you guys back in. There you are. So anyway, I pitched them an idea. I read the pilot, and I looked at kind of what they had been working on, and came up with a show that was pretty dark, but it was a way to introduce all the crew members on the ship in a really, I thought, interesting way. And the producers were all excited, and the studio got really quite excited. The same people that Steve and I had done Swamp Thing with, and everybody was on board until and Roy Scheider was on board, and then it got to Spielberg's development people, and they said, no, not on our show. We're not doing anything that dark. Because at the time they were thinking it was going to be a fanciful show with undersea, giant seahorses, and it was going to be emerald cities, and they didn't even know what the show was going to be. Spielberg was off in Europe doing Schindler's List about the Holocaust, and my script was called A Place Called Armageddon. Armageddon, Holocaust. He was not into it, and he had 5 minutes to talk to somebody on the phone about this episode. He went, not on my show. Armageddon, forget about it. And
bad timing.
The entire producing staff quit the show because the script didn't get shot. The LA Times wrote a huge article in the Calendar magazine. You can look it up. I mean, there was a big article that the show was in some upheaval. Well, obviously they got on their footing. They did a perfectly great series. Other people that Steve and I know, Patrick Hasberg and other people, did the show, and they were good people, and Les Sheldon, all these guys that we knew came on the show later and did it successfully. But it was a painful experience for me as a writer, because I thought I had found the real nerve, even as a freelance writer. I was shocked that these guys gave me the privilege of trying to explore all these backstories of these characters, because they thought they were all going to die, and it was all of them reflecting on their lives. It was really a special moment for me. That was painful. That script wound up getting me the producing job on Christie, which became a career-defining credential for me, because the producer of that, Patricia Green, had read that script and really liked it and couldn't believe they didn't shoot it and hired me. So It was painful, and then it was wonderful. And that's like the life of a writer.
Most of this business is what is not produced. I mean, there's so much writing that I have done, which nobody's ever going to see, but I was paid for it. Almost, Tom and I have both done huge amounts of pilot development. We've been paid a good amount of money to develop series that never saw a camera.
So you really need to have a pretty thick skin, it sounds like. I remember Tom and I we're sitting at, was it Cone's Deli, or where were we, in L.A.? Cantor's Deli, and I was doing a podcast episode with him, and I remember the main crux of it was about having to have, I guess, a pretty thick skin, again, because you're going to get a lot of rejections, basically. And you said, Sticks, that you had a fellow you worked with you felt was even a better writer than you, but he just got discouraged by getting scripts turned down more often than you did, and you just kept driving. And that guy quit and got out of the business.
Yeah. This is stick-with-itness.
That's it.
Is
absolutely.
And even though Steve and Bert clicked real early, real fast, and they deserved it. There's no fluke about that. They deserved it. The right time, right place. But it's not like this has been the Holland Tulip Festival for Steve his entire career. There are moments when you think, was that it? Am I done? Are they done with me? You know, it is a roller coaster ride of huge highs, low lows, rejection, misinterpretations, miscommunications, crushed expectations, then another huge high.
Yeah.
It is not for everybody. And Steve, I know, subscribes to this, that anybody watching this that aspires to be in the movie business, please go for it, but please know what you're getting into.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's we made it sound so depressing, and so much of the business is so negative. It's hard to talk about it at times, but there is not one success story in this business that does not include some version of the word perseverance.
Absolutely.
That's the word right there.
That's the thing. And the thing that happened with Bert and myself in the writing area, we didn't take it for granted. Everything fell together, but here's something that's extremely important, and I'm not just saying it because Tom is here. We fell in with the right people who were willing to take us and mold us and try to teach us and show us how to navigate this. And the Stephen J. Cannell production company was an incredibly writer-friendly company. You could walk down the hall and just stick your head in and say to, you know, Steve's assistant, Grace, I'm going to go say hi to Steve. Oh, yeah, fine. Hi, Steve. How you doing? And this is like the top producer, him and Aaron Spelling and Steve Bochco. They're the tops. And yet it's Steve. He's just down there. So
he'd come in your office. Remember, he'd come in your office sometimes, and he'd sit on the couch, and he'd start telling you stories about the Rockford files, and just, hey, what you working on, Steve? And then 2 hours later, you've just had this amazing experience with one of the greatest creative minds that literally, other than Rod Serling and a handful of guys, that he was it, and a prolific writer that none of us will ever be able to match, and he'd come in and tell you these stories about stuff. Oh, let me tell you a story. I'll tell you a story about Jim Garner and me. And you couldn't believe it. And then, you know, you were so stimulated and jazzed. He knew what he was doing. He wasn't just some old guy telling stories.
He was a cheerleader.
Inspiring the troops.
He was.
Knew we revered him. And he knew we had all seen every episode of all the shows that he created and that we revered those. And he knew exactly what he was doing. He was injecting the troops with possibility.
Yeah.
That I did this. He was severely dyslexic. If you saw one of his scripts, anybody's dyslexic, knows anybody dyslexia out there? If you saw one of his scripts, the way he typed it on that famous typewriter, where he tear the sheet out at the end of the shows, it looked like your cat walked on the keyboard. It was just all nonsense. And Grace Curcio, his assistant, somehow translate that into English and retype those scripts so they made sense. He was so prolific, but he was severely dyslexic, and yet his mind we were all in awe of him throughout the entire time.
There was an excellent question. Again, Matt Alexander had asked, in this case, again, for both of you guys, what was your most painful pass on a pilot?
Every one of them.
When they pass, it's painful.
Every one of them. Yeah. There's
I had a pilot at CBS. They were looking for a vigilante justice type of show. So every once in a while, they decide, well, let's do vigilante justice. It's time for one of those. And I went in and I pitched them something, and they liked it, and they put me to script. Little did I know they were double developing the same general concept with other writers, and different show. And mine was just an idea, and they liked it, and I was writing it. That one, they got a star attached, Danny Aiello, of some note. And so when the two scripts were handed in, they said, well, we really like the script, but we're going to go with this other one. Well, the other one had a star attached. I wound up actually a producer, a consulting producer on that series, Della Ventura. And I liked the show. The guy that wrote the show was, a kind of a hero of mine. I really loved his work, and other guys in the show were great. So it worked out fine, but it was painful because I really liked my pilot. I liked it a lot. It was younger. It was hipper. He was an old man, in those by that time. And I had this kind of young group of vigilante people. I thought it was a cool show. I didn't have any stars attached. And there you go.
Yeah, there's the business aspect of it can kill a wonderful concept and a wonderful pilot script, wonderful proposal. I find that aside from this kind of a situation where you get a pass on a pilot, which you do have to kind of say, okay, well then, fine, I'm going to move it on into something else. I'm gonna try to hold on to it and sell it later on. Two quick stories. One is something that almost every writer who's been in the business has had to deal with, and that is when you spend a lot of time developing and writing a pilot script, and you are ready to take it out there, and you're in love with it, and you have spent months and months and months developing this, and then it's ready to go, and there it is. It's on TV, except it's not yours. It's somebody else's. Now, I'm not talking about theft. I'm just talking about the fact that sometimes minds think alike.
Just the concept. I mean, it has the same general.
Well, it can vary from concept to. There's one script that I wrote that I loved, and it was really an intricate story, a big fish out of water type of story, and I really loved this. I wrote this script, and I suddenly saw a blurb for a brand new TV show coming up, and the log line was identical to my script's log line. And so I started looking for information on this, and it was the same basic concept, same basic characters with a fish out of water, same locations from Chicago to Florida.
Ooh.
And it was almost identical. And here's the capper. The guy who created it was somebody I went to school with. Now, I had never read his script or even knew he was developing it. Apparently, it was based on a play that he had done.
It's too much of a coincidence.
He had no idea what I was doing. He didn't.
Huh.
It just happened.
What Steve is alluding to is that, and this is very hard for writers to understand, ideas are like pixie dust. They're in the universe. And whatever it was that inspired Steve's idea,
Hit the same guy.
he connected to in the cosmos is the same thing that connected this other guy, probably.
The 100th monkey concept, basically.
Yeah.
It was something. I was the monkey.
I can't tell you how many times on shows we've had, and Steve has been there with me. Guys will come in. It's the fourth season of a show. You've discussed every idea that you could ever possibly discuss or rejected them, and somebody comes in with an idea you've never heard before. And you go, wow, that's amazing. We'll get back to you. Later that day, another writer comes in, pitches you exactly the same idea. Now, in 4 years, you've never heard or thought of that idea. And two guys come in the same day, the same week, same thing. Now, if you buy one of those, the other guy thinks you ripped them off.
Right.
And you didn't. It literally is just lightning striking in the most cosmic, bizarre ways.
Wow.
People are absolutely convinced. Here's another one. Before I was a writer, I was a production guy, and I worked for producer Reinhold Wigge. He was an old friend. He created Night Court. He did Barney Miller and a bunch of shows. And he was hired by ABC to do a reluctant superhero show. A guy gets superpowers, and he doesn't know what to do with them, and he's uncomfortable with it. And so he wrote a script, and they hired an actor to be in it. Tom Hanks was rejected for the lead role, by the way. The sidekick was Jay Leno, who they did hire. And so they could have had Tom Hanks and Jay Leno, and he passed on Tom Hanks. God rest Riney's soul. Made the pilot for ABC. The show that got on the air was something called Greatest American Hero, by Stephen J. Cannell, a reluctant superhero. Neither Steve nor Riney, who were both formidable producers with great credentials,
got any credit for it.
And neither of them knew the other one was doing it. The network double developed. They said, here's what we're interested in doing. Scott, we'd like to do a reluctant superhero show. A guy gets some powers, he didn't know what to do with them. And it kind of a comedy adventure show. They both did their versions, and they went with Steve Cannell for whatever reason. Maybe Riney should have hired Tom Hanks. He wound up doing Bosom Buddies, and give him a
Well, Bosom Buddies was fine, and I think also the music really helped make the Greatest American Hero. It was one of my son Sean's favorite shows. He used to watch that in the 18th.
But the point is, Steve Cannell did not know about this or steal it from Reinhold Wiki, and Reine had no idea Steve was doing this. The networks just, somebody had an idea, let's do a Relic and Superhero show. Here's a hot sitcom writer, and here's a hot, comedy, action, adventure, detective writer. Let's see what they can do with this one-line idea. And they both did really interesting shows. Steve's went on the air and became a kind of a cult classic type show. A great show. Robert Culp, and fabulous. But you don't know where these things come from. And so the painful pilot story, that was painful for Reine.
Yeah.
I give it to you. He put his heart and soul in it. It was a funny pilot. He didn't get on the air.
Steve, you said you had a second story also?
Oh, I was just going to say that this one was one that was kind of crushing, although I did make some use out of it. I had developed a concept, and I'm not going to name the studio on this, you'll find out for obvious reasons, because this was a while back, and things have, fortunately, thank God, things have changed. One of the things I always really loved about the Steve Cannell show was that we were actually, for doing action adventure shows, the shows we did, the production company there, we were kind of on the edge of pushing what the restrictions of television as far as stereotypes were concerned.
All right.
We were trying to not fall into a lot of those tropes, but at the same time, we had to use them. But I had developed this one concept, which was based on somebody's life story. And it was the main character was actually somebody who had been, had a physical defect since he was born, and he had conquered it to a certain point, but he was still in recovery. So he was handicapped. And that was the driving of his entire story, that was just a part of his life. And he was still recovering from this because he had an operation, and he was now trying to basically walk again. And so at the same time, he was also an investigative reporter. And so it was interesting doing that kind of a character with this. So I'd taken it to this one studio, and they loved it, thought it was fantastic. And so we started into negotiations, and at the same time, I'm dealing with the executives about how the story is going to be developed. And keep in mind, it's all about this character's life and struggle and what he's had to go through, and the fact that he's still got this optimism and he still has a mission. And so we finally got to a point where I was with one of the executives, and he said, look, we're ready to sign this deal, but we got one thing. And I went, what? And he goes, does he have to be handicapped?
Wow.
And I was like, are you kidding? And he goes, yeah, that might make the audience uncomfortable. And I said, good. That's the whole point.
That's the point, yeah.
And we went back and forth on this, and even he suggested maybe we could expand this to make it an ensemble so he doesn't really have a lead role. And I said, I remember looking at him, I said, oh, you mean we could ignore him like we really do? I was getting vicious on this. And so he finally said to me, he said, Steve, we want to do this, but what's the bottom line for you? And I said, I'll tell you what the bottom line is. The bottom line is the bottom line of that check. You sign it and I'm your whore. Until then, this is my project.
My show, yeah.
And so he said, okay. And so we entered into a deal. And then what I did was justice, I like to think. I kept going with everything the executives brought up that took the show farther away from my concept. And I started suggesting things that took it farther away from the concept until the only thing that was left was the title. Everything else had been changed. That character was no longer in it. The situation was no longer in it. It was now a paparazzi type of story about going after supernatural events. Literally, it had gone so far. And then I took the original story and I sold it somewhere else.
So they never produced the show?
They never produced the show. Neither one of them got produced.
No, because it got ruined by their notes.
Yeah,
which
destroyed.
Sadly, and some of my close friends are or were studio and network executives. Some are more astute and talented than others, and the good ones are really good and really understand things, and the others maybe, we don't know how they got those jobs, but Steve was working with some of them clearly, and it's too bad because I know that project, and it would have been smart to just give this a try, cast it beautifully, and they would have had a hit. But they all get.
I know sometimes there will be characters that get drawn away or out. In other words, they'll have a child or some children, and then the main characters are off solving crimes or doing something, and they're supposed to be home watching their kids. I mean, they were originally part of this, and suddenly they're just completely written out of the script. And it's like they're trying to make the viewer forget about this, those who are really invested in the whole storyline of that. And that kind of bugs me sometimes. It's kind of like they don't even talk about calling their nanny or anything, or they're gone for weeks at a time or working underground, or, whereas before they were taking their kids to the park and going shopping, and then suddenly they were gone or whatever.
Yeah, there could be many reasons why. Obviously, somebody is either the actor is released, they have another contractual agreement, or there's, it just doesn't sync. Sometimes you deal with assholes. Certainly a lot of people who have worked with me have said that. So, there could be many reasons why characters would be removed or lessened. This may be apocryphal, but I believe there was a soap opera which had been on the air for like 30 or 40 years and finally was canceled a while back. They had an episode a long time ago where somebody's child walked up the stairs, and then that child was never mentioned ever again.
Wow. Okay.
And in the final episode, the adult actor walked back down the stairs. It may be an apocryphal story, but I believe something like that. Because
remember, Steve, on Swamp Thing, we inherited shows from our predecessors, including the abduction and kidnapping of
that's right.
A 9-year-old boy. The lead character, Tressa's son, is abducted and kidnapped, and the last they saw of him was in a crate on a cargo ship going out to sea in a foggy, stormy night. And that was it. And
never mentioned him again.
And it's like, when we got the job,
look at the time, gotta go.
It's like, holy crap, you can't do that to the audience.
Yeah.
Somebody's watching this show, and somebody like that little boy. We need to resolve that. And Gary Nelson wrote a really interesting sci-fi script about the mother, hearing on the radio, clues, and she went to South America and she found her son, and we resolved that. But the previous regime, for whatever reason, that we got to get rid of this kid, and they just abducted him and shipped him away.
Yeah.
And remember, it was a similar thing. The kid walking up the stairs. It's hilarious, and it was just inattentive producing, shall we say?
Well, it kind of reminds me like I remember on the few Simpsons episode, they'll be doing something so bizarre, they will be talking to each other and then look at the camera and say, and we'll never talk about this episode again.
And by the way, there's another rule of kind of or folklore about TV episodes, and that is by the second or third season, one of the cast members needs to break out to become a star, like a cover of People magazine type star, or the show's not going to make it. On Happy Days, it was a show about Ron Howard and his buddies, and there was this peripheral comic relief character named Fonzie.
Fonzie, yeah.
Right. Well, Henry Winkler became the breakout star. Nobody saw that coming.
That's a good point.
He walked on the screen and it took over the show. He became a sensation. He was the cover of all the magazines and dolls and everything. And
he was the bad boy girls loved.
And rumor has it, none of us were there, but there was some discord on the set among cast members and producers, and what are we going to do? The show's not about him, and now the network wants all the stories about him. And we've met him. He's a gracious, elegant, wonderful guy, and he didn't want that. But there you go. And but nobody saw that one coming. They thought, well, we got Opie, and we've got these other cute young guys as his buddies. That's the show. Yeah. And Marilyn Ross is the mother. We got this great cast. Fonzie breaks out and is the hottest thing in show business.
I'm surprised they listened to the viewers instead of the
there was no denying it.
The mucky mucks.
He became the show, and it was Fonzie and Happy Days. It wasn't just Happy Days featuring Fonzie, but it's the kind of thing that happens. Mm-hmm. And when you work on a show for a couple of years, and if nobody really breaks out in that way on some level, then the show's probably not going to make it. And usually there's one breakout, Farrah Fawcett on Charlie's Angels. I mean, these people, somebody breaks out of the pack and becomes the thing.
They maybe have their own spin-off
the
or something.
identity, the branding.
They become like a pop icon representing the show. And so they take the lead of it.
Yeah,
right.
And it takes it over. And if it's an ensemble show, it's really difficult for the ensemble to cope with the fact that they're no longer a co-equal. We're talking about actors. They're human beings. They work hard. They struggle to get to where they are. Now they finally got an ensemble gig on a show.
Like Seinfeld or Friends or something where they're all kind of equal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then somebody goes out and blows them all to the sideline a little bit in terms of attention and media and whatever, and maybe even money. And it becomes a problem for people like Steve and me to navigate that and negotiate it and keep things moving, because you don't know always. You hope that somebody's going to break out, but you don't really. If anybody says they know who's going to break out, they don't really know. And it kind of, there's always somebody, bam. And that's
Steve, also going back to Xena for just a minute, that Vanessa had asked if we're going to be seeing a virtual reading episode scene. It'd be kind of cool for the fans for the 26th anniversary.
Virtual reading episode scene.
Wow. With you playing all the roles.
Well, because of the way I actually write, I do walk around the house saying the dialogue and being the characters. I
just want to see you dressed up as Xena.
Well, I actually said to the fans one time at a convention, I was describing that process, and I said, I'll walk around the house, and I said, I'll do mindless things because that's when my mind is most active creatively, and I will become the characters. And I said, you have no idea how many times those two women have been in the shower with me. I had a really good reaction from that.
Yeah.
That's an interesting, I think, has somebody done that? I think.
That's got to be pretty popular. I've seen that for like The Walking Dead and some other readings like that. And there was a show that Josh Gad has in which they have done virtual readings like Back to the Future. And he's got a YouTube thing that's very cool.
But I think what they're talking, and I think maybe this is what you're talking about as well. It's about getting the cast back together, doing the original cast on that. Yeah, that would be interesting. I don't know. Well, it'd be kind of fun to do it.
Maybe take the last episode that you did and recreate it, or it wouldn't be something new, would it?
No. These are. It's like recently they did with films. They've been doing it. Like Scott Pilgrim, they got most of the cast back and did that. So fortunately, most of the cast of Xena, and I say most, and I can't think of why I would say most. We still like each other. So.
Those actors, have they worked with you? Jeez.
Yeah, I know. Well, fortunately, we were shooting in New Zealand, so I was not down on the set all the time to make myself totally annoying. But
what's the lady's name who played Xena?
Lucy Lawless.
Lucy Lawless, that's right. Because I remember she was in another HBO show about the Gladiator, or I think it was Gladiators.
Spartacus.
Spartacus. That was it. That was the last time I saw her doing something. Has she been doing something since then?
Oh yeah. She does a lot of work. She's great. She has a series on right now, and believe me, a Xena fan's going to pop up and tell me the name of it. And the word murder is in it. We just hit lightning in a bottle with that cast. We just Lucy and Renee, especially, two incredibly talented women, and both of them with different acting styles, which as an actor was amazing to me. Different acting styles, and yet no competition, no ego between the two of them. They just boom, went like that
from the very beginning.
From the beginning, and
that was good casting.
It was. We were so blessed with that casting,
and really, really good. The chemistry between actors is an undefined.
Crucial.
The chemistry between them. Some of the fans, admittedly, projected perhaps more on that than was maybe even there. But the fact is, these actresses had chemistry, and that's so hard. You can't put it in if you could invent that, everything would be a hit. But two really interesting actors, and they just clicked. And then the right words, and everything. But that's special.
Yeah, and we had on that show. I referred to this as being kind of an upward spiral. For writers, you don't participate on the set, and that's a big problem with the industry in the sense that it becomes an us versus them type of mentality. Some people are playing politics. They always want to blame it on the office. you know, but we're on the set, there's those bad people up there, and, you know, that happens a lot. And what happens is that sometimes you end up with directors and actors, and just on the set in general, where they will get a script and they just decide they want to do this, they want to change that, they want to rearrange this, they want to do whatever.
And they get bored.
And and what happens is that as the writers, we see the dailies and we see what's coming in, and we go, I spent like a month and a half putting my heart into that. I canceled a vacation. I stayed home on the weekends. But heck, it's just, oh well, I'll just write the next one. And it's a downward spiral. You lose the enthusiasm. I was like, why should I put everything I have into this? When you have one of those blessed shows, and Xena was one of those, you have the reverse. And when we started the show, when I came onto the show right at the beginning, R.J. Stewart and Rob Tappert, they were already there developing the show, and then I was brought in. Babs Grayhowski was on the show. She was the one who introduced me to them. And we didn't know anything really a lot about Lucy. So we were kind of like, okay, and Renee, I'd never met Renee. So it was kind of like you're testing the waters with the scripts. So I remember RJ and I saying, well, we don't know what they're capable of, so let's do a little Clint Eastwood thing here. Give like Xena some pithy lines that are straight and to the point, just nothing really challenging. And so we started that, and then suddenly what we got back from both Lucy and Renee was like, okay, they turned that into something I didn't see coming. All right, fine. Well, I'm going to challenge them more. And they gave it back. And it became at the point where we couldn't wait to see the dailies. And I was told, and certainly Renee and I have talked about this, that they were anxious to see our scripts. So now we had an upward spiral. Everybody was trying to make the show better because we had a sense of pride in it. And pride in a show for a showrunner is something that if you can achieve that throughout the entire cast and crew, you really do have magic, because they all see their fingerprints on the final project and they're proud of it.
The other one that Steve and I shared was Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
In that you have two kinds of production entities. You have the no-can-do crew. We can't do that. Oh, we can't afford that. We can't do that. There's no way we can get that done. And then you have the can-do crew. And it's, yeah, we can do that. Well, I don't know how we're going to pay for it, but we'll figure that out. That's awesome. And that was the Swamp Thing crew, and obviously the Xena crew. And I say crew, I mean everybody, the directors and the cast. And so when you have a can-do crew who are there for all, everybody's there for all the right reasons, and they're invested in the show. On Swamp Thing, we were shooting 6 days a week, and it was brutal in Florida heat and all that stuff. But that group of people could not do enough to. It was like a badge of honor to make the day's work and get it done right and make it be cool and good. Yeah. And in that case, because it was so in such an intense production schedule, we always had a producer there. If I wasn't there, Steve would be there. If he wasn't there, our friend Jeff Myro was there. But a producer level person was always in the office or on the set every day, 6 days a week, to answer questions, to help move it along, to just keep the little issues from popping up.
Yeah.
If an actor has a question or an issue, let's fix it right now. Boom. You don't have to bother anybody else. Well, I'll take care of it. I'm the producer. I'll fix it. And so Steve did it a bunch of times. I did a few times. And it really keeps things moving and keeps everybody's positive outlook positive. And I think going back to the question about your favorite and your worst and whatever, I mentioned the Sequest experience. One of my best experiences, I had two. One was Swamp Thing, sci-fi fantasy, really interesting show. Creatively, we had unlimited potential, and us permission to write whatever kinds of stories we wanted. And the other one was Catherine Marshall's Christie, which was a lovely show, historical drama based on real people, and different crews, different circumstances, different budgets, different expectations. But boy, when you can get that Xena or Swamp Thing experience with your crew and your cast, there's nothing like it. And
but by the way, Scott,
I was going to say, I had lunch with a guy today, a retired doctor. He said, "Do you miss it? Do you miss working on the shows?" I said, "No." He said, "Really?" I said, "I miss the camaraderie on the shows where it was special." And done a bunch of series, and only a couple of them were special writers group, special cast dynamic, and that has nothing to do with the concept of the show necessarily. It's just that there's something happening here, and I better treasure it, because when this is done in 2 or 3 or 4 years, whatever it is,
that's over.
It's over, and it may be a miserable tooth pull of an experience on the next show, which some of them are, because of those circumstances are completely different, and you walk in, you go, oh God, what?
We're going to need to wrap up here fairly shortly, but Steve, you're getting ready to ask a question. You had something there? I
just want to make a comment though about because Swamp Thing is actually a really good example of many things, and something, by the way, Scott, I think you're going to appreciate. One of the things about Swamp Thing is that when Tom took over the show, there are 22 episodes that had already been done. And Tom took over the show, and we were given 50 episodes to produce. And he brought myself and Jeff Myro in to help out. And the budget was slashed. And I don't mean, it was cut. It was slashed. It was to the point that we had no overtime, could not afford it. We shot 36 hours. That was it. And there was nothing that you saw on the final episode that could not be seen through a lens. In other words, no optical effects, because we couldn't afford a lab.
Right.
So that was an incredible challenge. And believe me, the amount that we were being paid for this show to budget it was so incredibly small. And so what we did is, the first thing we did is we said, we can't do the big action superhero things. And so we're going to do character shows. We're going to do a focus on the human aspect.
Go back to like Star Trek, like we were talking about earlier, about the people, not the story.
A little bit. Yeah. In fact, in Swamp Thing, the origination of Swamp Thing was an angst being. I mean, it was more like that. So we started concentrating on that, and we called in every favor we could with every actor we could to get them on the show. Mm-hmm. But literally, it was like, because we didn't have the money, everybody came together to problem solve, and the doors were always open to everybody. You could be a dolly pusher, you could be anybody. You could walk into the office. I have a suggestion, and this is what you'll appreciate, Scott. There was an episode I had written, and Philip Michael Thomas actually was the guest star on it. And
Miami Vice.
Yeah, and I knew Philip, and we worked together, and we were trying to actually sell a project together. So in this episode, it was kind of a topper type of thing, where there was a car found in the swamp, and this couple, Philip Michael Thomas and his wife, was played by actually his ex-wife, they were ghosts. And so they wanted to find out who, if somebody deliberately ran them off the road and killed them.
Yeah.
And so what I had written in the script was this one moment where they're trying to affect the environment because they're trying to stop one of our leads, from being killed, and it's at night. So what I'd written is that at a certain point, they make the headlights on a car turn on, and the light beams go right through them, and you can now see them as ghosts.
Like a Pepper's ghost.
Well, it's an optical effect. We can't do an optical effect. There's no lab. But
you jump hundreds and hundreds of dollars to do that effect. Yeah. We didn't have it.
But you jumped the gun on me, because what happened is the director was Steve Beers, and we were trying to figure this out, how we could do this. And I stopped and I said, here's an old magic trip called the Pepper's Ghost. And he had heard of it. And I said, we'll get a big translucent piece of plastic, and we'll put the characters, put the car over here, and we'll shoot it from this direction, and we'll put the characters over here, reverse their costuming, have a lucite in the middle of it, bring up the lights on them, and it'll look like it goes through them. And I remember Steve looked at me with this big grin, and he said it this way. He said, Sears and Beers doing it with mirrors. And we did it. And it is an impressive effect, but it came out of magic. It came out of stage shows. Exactly.
And we had a production designer.
I love that.
Who was a brilliant guy, and he came from theater. And we would have things written, and everybody go, we can't afford it. The line producer, we can't afford it. And or the production manager. And he'd say, I don't know. I think let me think about it. In the theater, we did Macbeth once, and we had an effect in the theater. And he'd come up with something that cost $1.50, and through the lens, in-camera effect, it worked great.
On a two-dimensional screen, looked great, huh?
Orvis Rigsby. And by the way, Orvis Rigsby was also the production designer when I did Xena. And here's the difference with when you go on a set, you see the camera angles, and if you walk down, you turn around and you say, "Oh, there's the back. Oh, now I can see how you fooled me." Orvis was one of those people who could design and build a set that you could walk anywhere in there and actually think you were there.
That's cool.
He was brilliant.
God rest him. He was. I always wanted to work with him again, and never got to. And I wanted to because he was extraordinary. But the point is, it's that can-do crew. That is, going back to that and to wrap that point up. But it's when you deal with people who really are good at their jobs and have the right spirit, like Xena or Swampy especially, you can do it for whatever the money and the restrictions and the difficulties are. And I feel very privileged to have a couple of those experiences in my career, and I know Steve does, because they just don't come along very often, and they're offset by a bunch of them that are like,
Okay, I'm going to cash the check. Yeah.
Well, listen, it's been a lovely chat, and I can't believe I just looked at the clock, and we're really kind of we could stay here for, I'm sure, another hour and a half. And I know we got people
now, right? Everybody has either killed themselves or they're gone to bed. So, but this is fun, really fun, and I'm glad you guys had a chance to meet because you need to know each other. Two good friends from different parts of my life, but it's very nice, and you have such important stuff in common that you guys should.
We do. I would like to have you on an episode of the podcast, so I'll get your digits later, and we will.
They open the castle back up again. We can go in
and have an NPH.
Exactly.
Yeah, when you get back to LA, you got to call Sears and have them in to watch your close-up magic or whatever, whichever room you're in that time.
That's right.
I would love it.
Again, there's the book that you got, the non-user friendly guide. And what was this? This was the last cities of there.
This was this is an anthology also. I've got 2.5 stories in this one. This was a series it's of stories based around the artwork of Jeff Sturgeon, and he had projected come up with this entire idea of a future world where basically cities have to float because we've destroyed the environment. And each city has their own domain. They're like fiefdoms, and how they interact with each other and war with each other. And there's some, I don't even know why. I'm glad I'm in that book, but we have authors in there like Jody Lynn Nye, and we have Kevin J. Anderson. I mean, we have major talented authors. I say we, Jeff does. Jeff managed to bring everybody together. So yeah, that's also an anthology, and that should be coming out pretty soon, as a matter of fact.
Well, didn't they have a movie? It seems like there was some floating city.
No, that was the Rolling Cities.
That was it.
Yes,
that was
in Battle Angel Alita. They also dealt with floating cities there.
Okay,
so different concept as to how that happened, but yeah, that was also.
I think it was Alita that I was thinking of actually. Yeah. And what about this Starvlag?
That is Stalag X.
Okay.
Stalag X book. Really good book.
Thank you. That's a graphic novel, and it also has a novella in the back of it. That was something that I co-created with Kevin J. Anderson. For those of you who don't know who Kevin J. Anderson is, I slap. Kevin and Brian Herbert write all the Doom sequel books. Huh. He's got, Kevin has like 23 million books that have been sold worldwide. He's done adaptations, and he and I met at a convention and just hit it off. And we've been trying to work on a particular project together, and it finally came to fruition in this. Stalag X is published by The Vault Comics, and it's about a interstellar war in the future, a war of genocide, and we're basically losing it because nobody takes prisoners. It's basically we kill each other. The Krail are the aliens. And what this centers around, however, is that one of the humans, soldiers, is taken prisoner, and he's sent to a concentration camp, which shouldn't exist because nobody takes prisoners. But there's a reason why it exists, and it could lead to how the war is won. And it is not for kids. It is extremely graphic. Kevin and I decided that we wanted people to understand that war and concentration camps are not just tropes.
Yeah.
So we projected it into the future so we had license to do certain things. And that, by the way, I have a shopping agreement. Kevin and I have a shopping agreement with on this project with Francis Lawrence, the director who directed 3 of the Hunger Games movies, I Am Legend, Red Sparrow, and he contacted us about it. And I've always loved his directing, so it was kind of like, oh my gosh, this is happening. And then after we set the deal, I was talking to his associate, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. So I was like, so how did you guys get this? Did you, because I'd sent a copies of it over here to Lionsgate, my friends there, and I sent it here, and I figured somehow it made it to his office. And his associate said, actually, I think I bought it in Barnes & Noble's.
And by the way, a shopping agreement means the director-producer has the permission to shop it around to find financing and distribution. And it's a very important step in how movies get made. It's not always Warner Brothers hires you to write a movie and Clint Eastwood's already attached. You have projects like this, they find you, somehow you connect the guy. So it's an option agreement to run with this using the power of and the influence of his reputation and his group. So that's really cool.
But the book is available also on Amazon, I guess, and they can just go to your website at.
It is available. Should still be on Amazon. I'm not sure if it's one of those things that one copy left. Buy it now.
Yeah.
It didn't get as much of a push through the publishers after it ran its run in Barnes and Noble, but it's still out there. It's still popular.
They'll find it. They'll find a copy of it.
I still have copies, and also you don't have a graphic for this, but we talked beforehand. Diana Zimmerman, who is also a wonderful magician, who is like one of the seminal female magicians back in the 80s and 90s and 70s.
She ran the Junior Magicians group at the Magic Castle.
As a matter of fact. She had written a series of books called Candide, and we met and started talking about that, and that's another project that's moving forward. At this point, I can't give too many details, but we have developed, between the two of us, we wrote the two episodes, first episodes, plus a full package, a full proposal. It hasn't officially gotten out yet, but we are already getting reaction from a lot of people who are hearing it through the grapevine, that's the best way to tell things.
Scott,
yeah,
this points up something that people, whoever's still watching this by now, need to hear. Listen to how many projects this man has worked on, is working on, is pursuing actively, concurrently. You don't have one idea and you run with that for 5 years. It's a multitasking situation, and writing books, writing graphic novels, pitching projects, doing writing assignments. People need to kind of see what that is, because it's a lot of work, and some of it sees the light of day, some doesn't. You love them all like your cherished children.
Again, persistence, I guess.
And it's beyond persistence, it's obsessive compulsive disorder. You really need to. Steve has one screenplay that I read 20 years ago that is still alive, and you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, it is.
And it is maybe the best thing he's ever written, or the best idea he ever had. And someday it's going to get made, and I know he's still having meetings and talking to people about it, because it is really good, and it's been auctioned by people, and it almost got. But that's the way this is done. It is not an instant gratification business, to say the least.
And also, you got a couple of books out there. Of course, we were talking initially about the newest one, which is Devious Thinking.
I do indeed. Next to Harry Potter and the Bible, these are the two best books ever written. And maybe the Hardy Boys series, Nancy Drew. So thank you very much, Scott, for that. Devious Thinking is a revenge comedy, such as the title suggests. Silent Partners is a forensic mystery. We talked about genre at the very beginning. This is kind of a genre shifting story where it changes form as it moves through the character's journey, and they're both at Amazon or my website. You can go there and read all about them, the reviews, and see trailers and stuff, and click the links there.
Devious Thinking is such a wonderful little romp. It just is. I mean, you're like being pulled along on this ride and keeping up with everything. But
thank you.
But the other one, I'm trying to remember what was the name that you ended up on the book. Silent Partners, because I remember what the first name was. That one, I described that to somebody a little while back, where I said, you're going to read it, you're going to get involved with it, and you're going to get inside this character's head, and you know exactly where he's going, and then he doesn't go there, it's over here. And where it goes, you realize, holy crap, It was right there in front of me. I didn't see this turn.
Oh, it's
Okay,
great.
now and then boom, you're in another direction. It's got so many back and forths.
It was as we say, we have projects we do for work, and then we have passion projects. And that one was my first novel, but it was a passion project that I had been nibbling at and trying to figure out for many, many years, and finally got the novel written. Steve had a pivotal note that he gave me. He read the manuscript, and we had lunch at whatever that place was at Burbank, at Toluca Lake. What was that hamburger joint?
It was
Hamptons.
Well, it was Hamptons, and it was Moe's.
Yeah, Moe's. We went to Moe's and we had lunch. And he said, "I really like your book." He said, "Wouldn't it be cool if there was a character that blah blah blah?" I went, "You bastard, you're right." And I went home and did a rewrite because he had this epiphany, and it was just writers live in a world of what ifs.
Yeah.
What if this? Well, what if that? And he said, "What if?" It's like, oh my God. Yeah. Yes, what if? And it's like, bam, 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 and immediately all fell into place. I saw instantly what his what if instinct was. And it, I think, made a massive difference in that story. And I thanked him a million times, and I hate doing it publicly because I really dislike him a lot. But you know what? He was right. His instinct was in the writer's room on shows. How many times did somebody say, "What if?" And you go, "Damn it, you're right." And that was a what if. And it really made a big difference. And it's one of the elements of the book that people talk about when they contact me. It's like, oh my God, I had no idea. Well, what about you? It was the what if that he suggested.
And things like that, real quickly. The other side to that is this. Too many people take a question like that of, what if this, as a criticism? It's not.
Yeah,
and I have had it happen to me as well. And my reaction was what I saw Tom's reaction in that particular case, because really all I did was I asked a simple question.
Yep.
Just a simple question.
Yep.
And I remember we were sitting at Moe's and I brought this up and I said, what if that, da, 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 da. And I remember you paused and you looked up at me and you went, oh my God. Oh my God. And then you literally said to me, I got to rewrite this. Don't even bother with the rest of this. I got to redo this. And that's the reaction you should have. If somebody points out a what if that makes your story better, it's not a criticism, it's a revelation, and go with it.
Well, and writers share with writers. You don't turn to somebody, anybody that's still watching this or watches it later, if you write something, don't give it to your best friend Harry and say, aren't I great? Or your cousin who's going to tell you you're great. You want to give it to somebody who has an informed opinion, who
has a good perspective.
They can understand what you're trying to do and then suggest something to help you get there.
Right.
You need additional help. Steve totally understood what I was trying to do, responded really positively to that, but instantly his writer's mind said, what if? And he was absolutely right. It was the key change for me creatively that I think made the book work. So if anybody out there does read it, you'll know it when you get to it. It was Steve Sears.
Okay. We're going to wrap up because we're coming up on 2 hours. It's been a little longer than I thought. But one quick...
Do we get extra pay for this? Do we get... Is there like a... I know Steve negotiated for overtime after 45 minutes. So you're going to make some real dinero on this one.
Yeah, from the Screenwriters Guild, I'm sure. One last question, and to be quick, my son Sean had just asked me about this also. Is there any new project coming up for Walker, Texas Ranger?
Well, there is a series.
A new one? Yeah, Walker. But is that, so that's kind of...
It has nothing to do with us or...
That's what I thought.
Or I don't believe even the actual show. They took a character name. He's a Texas Ranger, and it's a whole new thing. I haven't watched it. I don't really...
I haven't either.
And frankly, without Chuck Norris, it's like, really? You're just taking the name. This guy's a really good actor, and I'm sure it's going to be a perfectly good show. But it was Chuck Norris. So people have asked me about it. It's like, it has nothing to do with anything we worked on. So.
And have you guys both seen the movie, which is going to be up, I think it's up for an Oscar, Mank, which is about the...
I saw it. I loved it.
Who wrote
the DVD and
Citizen Kane?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I loved it. I sat there with my wife, and I kept every time something would happen, I would say, "Oh, but here's the background on that. You got to know about this.
That's wonderful. I wish
it was so much of Hollywood.
We could spend another 15 minutes at least, I know, talking about that, because I have a lot of questions about what that must have been like back then, I guess, and writing and things, how that's evolved and whatnot. And Orson Welles. Anyhow, yeah, Uncle Orson. Anyhow, it's been a wonderful chat. Thank you guys.
Who I did get to work with once, by the way. So
did you?
Mr.
Oh,
Wells.
that's right. You told me about that.
So I have actually one tiny thread of a connection to the old era, and it was Mr. Wells. So we talk about that another time, and we need to have Steve come back and just talk some more about this stuff if anybody cares, because we had a great time.
We did. I don't even think we're broadcasting right now. I think they cut us off. Literally, the internet failed around the world. We've just been chatting.
The sad truth is Scott can't pay his internet bill. There's nothing. He just sits. He's a lonely guy sitting in his house right now, drinking scotch, and he doesn't even have internet.
He's going to burn this to a DVD and sell it out of a station
thing to do. I gotta go out and grab my shillelagh.
Excuse me? How rude!
I gotta grab my shillelagh and be off.
Wow! At least I was here when that happened, and you admitted it. That's great. I'm honored. Thank you for sharing.
Great seeing you guys. Steve, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Scott. This was fun. Yeah.
Thank you for being on. I appreciate that. So I appreciate everybody being on here this evening. Thank you, Sticks.
And all these people whose names have popped up there and said thank you and whatever. I appreciate that. I've been reading them as they go by, and that's much appreciated, because we care about this stuff, and if they're entertained and care about it too, that's really cool.
Yes. Yeah. And thank you very much then also for being on here then, Steve. I appreciate having Steve Sears, who is now a new friend and a magician, and you'll hear him in a future episode of the Magic Word podcast coming up sometime, and we'll talk movies then a little bit then too. So it's been just awesome.
I want to see you guys do card tricks, because Steve has invented a couple of tricks too. So you guys
what?
Turning tricks. It's not called inventing. It's called tuning tricks. So.
Oh, sorry.
That's like grabbing my shillelagh and turning tricks. There we go. So I'm going to close it out on that. And if you guys want to hang around for a little bit after I say goodbye over here, then that we can. But then until later, and if you want to come in tomorrow, I have my virtual happy hour in which we really do some serious drinking. That'll be at the same time, well, it's not the same bat channel. Actually, it's going to be on my Facebook page for the Magic Word podcast. And so you just need to go and check that one out, or also on the YouTube channel where you're watching this then perhaps now. And beyond that, there'll be another podcast that will be released then tomorrow with Doc Eason. I think you'll like hearing that one, Steve.
I love Doc.
Doc's a great guy. And he was
awesome.
won the Academy of Magical Arts Bar Magician of the Year until they retired it, I think, after that. And he's my guest, and you'll hear that released tomorrow morning on the magicwordpodcast.com, or wherever you get your podcast. You can listen to that then. So anyhow, thank you guys again very much. And we're rapidly reaching 1,000 people for subscribing to my pod letter. We were within 4 people of actually getting that, and you could be that 1,000th person. And if so, I'll mention your name on next week's podcast. So until next week, and you'll see Tom and I, or Sticks and Clutch Cargo, back here again next week. We may or may not have another wonderful guest. It's hard to be topping Steve. I think we've really set the bar pretty high here very early on with this thing that we're doing, Tom. But you'll be selecting a topic that we'll be posting then for next week for everybody to come back and enjoy us. Same place over here in Mincing Movie Magic. Until later, Scotty out.
Thanks for being with us. Please join us again next time for Mincing Movie Magic.